Amid the serene mountains of northern Spain, a summer retreat rapidly transforms into a nightmare. From inside their camper, José Solé, his wife, and daughter watch a torrent of water flow unstoppably below their window. Now, everything is gone. Just a few trailers are stuck to trees and waves of muddy water around them. Despite the gravity of the situation, the family is safe now. A wave flood carrying logs and rocks had stormed through. The sudden onslaught threw them into a desperate struggle for survival, the shadow of death looming. Dozens of others weren't as lucky. It came out of nowhere and caught them by surprise. Except for a few who knew it was only a matter of time before the inevitable. On the morning of Wednesday, August 7th, 1996, the Spanish National Institute of Meteorology issued a warning about the incoming storm for the northern part of the country. Heavy summer rains are frequent for this region, but according to experts, this one was more intensive, with the province of Aragon expected to be the most affected. And nestled in the north of it, deep in the Pyrenees mountain range, lies the Sierra de las Nieves campsite, one of the most beautiful in inland Spain at the time. The award-winning facility opened 6 years earlier and was renowned for its quality. In August, over 600 guests registered at the site. Even though many had decided to go on excursions, the place was swarming with people unfazed by the rain. After all, one summer shower definitely couldn't change their mood. When it started to pour in the late afternoon, people withdrew into their tents and campers and waited for the rain to stop. However, half an hour later, it was getting heavier. Nevertheless, it still didn't seem to bother the guests. Tucked away in their tents, they were unaware they were resting in a death trap. Las Nieves campsite was built on a sediment deposit at the foothold of two steep hills, but, more importantly, at the exit of the Aras ravine that runs between them. Over the years, it has been prone to powerful torrents of water rushing through its channel during periods of heavy rainfall. The estimated rainfall at the campsite was 200 to 250 millimeters on that day of the disaster. About 1/4 of that rainfall came down in just 8 minutes. The ground couldn't absorb that much water, so all the excess flowed down the ravine, picking up logs and rocks. This caused a blockage at the bridge, which broke under pressure, sending a wave of water and debris into the campsite. In just a few moments, calmness gave way to panic. As the wave swept through, guests were thrown into a fight for survival. Many were caught by surprise and had no time to escape. They struggled to stay afloat as the water carried them downstream, along with tents, furniture, cars, and even large campers. One of the survivors remembers how the current dragged him and his family. Somehow, he got trapped in the branches of a falling tree. He was lucky as he climbed it and found rescue in the high canopy. But unfortunately, his parents and 2 brothers were taken away by the torrent. Guests caught by the torrent while in their campers were somewhat better positioned as they were out of direct reach of the water. Yet, they were trapped inside their vans and trailers, floating like boats on the water. Like the teen, those trapped in the trees were lucky, as they were saved from being swept away by the flood.
My son shouted, "We're going to die." And I said, "No, we're not, son, but watching the news today, some kids have." But mine haven't.
As time passed, the water level declined, and the flood lost its destructive power. Nevertheless, the rain was still pouring, and brown, muddy water flowed through the camp, preventing people from escaping or reaching those still in danger. Precious time was lost until the water dropped to a safe level. Despite being deeply distraught by the tragedy, there was no time to lose as many people still had to be rescued. Luckily, the news of the disaster quickly reached the nearby village of Biescas and its residents, along with a small firefighting team that rushed to assist. They sent out an all-out call for help, and by nightfall, hundreds of soldiers, Red Cross members, and volunteers were at the site. Throughout the night, they worked diligently to rescue as many people as possible. All injured were transferred to Biescas, where they received first aid before being sent to a hospital. Sadly, as the rescue operation progressed, the first victims of the flood appeared. But by then, the darkness prevented the rescuers from assessing the scale of the tragedy. They only realized the horror that befell the campsite the next morning. Guests and rescuers wandered through the grounds covered in mud, searching for survivors and personal belongings. Where there used to be trees was now strewn with demolished cars and trailers. The camp streets had disappeared. Water, mud, and piles of rubble covered the entire area. Finding anyone was a true challenge. Even though trained dogs were brought in, the mud had hardened quickly, so rescuers battled to locate the bodies of both survivors and the dead buried beneath. The only way they could scan the ground was with the help of sticks, which was a slow and wearing process. Adding to the already challenging rescue, the torrent had carried bodies into the Gallego River. One victim was found 8 miles away in the Sabiñánigo swamp. Like many others, the force from the water was so powerful that it stripped their clothes off. The recovery operation lasted for days. Ambulances and helicopters transferred bodies to a makeshift morgue for identification. It was an arduous process. The police did not have exact information on the number of guests, nor did they know their identities. The reception computer was destroyed in the flood and rendered useless. Traumatized and numbed from the cold, the survivors were sent to Biescas, where a temporary shelter was established. Its residents showed solidarity for victims by offering them clothes, food, and accommodation in their homes. Experts claimed a flood like this only happens once every 200 years. But was that the case at the Biescas campsite? Many disagreed. The disaster didn't just come out of the blue, and it was actually people who got in the way of nature, not the other way around. Some blamed the camp's location at the mouth of the ravine that had shown a high flash flood potential in the past. In fact, following a dramatic flood 70 years earlier, authorities built a channel through the midline of the sediment deposit to direct water in case of heavy rainfall and protect the area. Furthermore, 36 sediment retention dams were built along the Erebus ravine to prevent landslides. However, the system built to prevent floods only contributed to the 1996 tragedy. During the storm, the excess water rushed down the ravine. This overwhelmed and broke most of the dams, releasing the sediments that they stored. As this happened, it picked up roughly 6,000 truckloads of logs, mud, and rocks. Eventually, the debris was stopped by a bridge above the campground, but it couldn't bear the pressure and broke, letting loose a wave of rubble that overwhelmed the artificial channel and covered the campsite. 87 people died in the Biescas Campsite Disaster. The last body would only be discovered nearly a year later, on July 28, 1997. While workers were removing the ravine bed near the scene of the tragedy, they found the remains of a 6-year-old boy. Considering the destructive force of the flood, it was fortunate that more than 500 visitors survived the tragedy, many of whom were absent from the park at the time. The mayor of Biescas rejected all accusations, instead claiming that the campsite was built in accordance with regulations. Yet records showed that before the construction, a government official had issued a negative report precisely because of the location's risk. The government recklessly neglected an expert's opinion. Now it was time to pay the price for it. The court of Huesca dismissed a criminal charge, citing the flood as exceptional and unpredictable, which the victims' families rejected. Instead, they commenced a decade-long legal battle with authorities. Finally, in 2005, the National Court recognized the authorities' responsibility and ordered the government of Aragon and the Ministry of the Environment to jointly indemnify 63 of the 87 fatalities with 11.2 million euros. The government never paid its share of the compensation. As for the Las Nieves campsite, it was rebuilt but in a new, safer location. A memorial was erected where it once stood, a grim reminder that nature has its laws and you cannot bypass them. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.